Hi, I'm Paule Pachter, President and CEO of Long Island Cares and the Harry Chapin Regional Food Bank, and welcome back to another episode of Breaking Bread, brought to you by CardWorks. Our good friends at CardWorks sponsor Breaking Bread, so if you have needs in the financial space, please visit cardworks.com. We are very, very happy to welcome back to our program Laura Harding, the president of Erase Racism. We began our conversation last time, and you just run out of time when there's so many important things to be said. So Laura, welcome back, and I really do have to start with this question.
Start with the questions.
What is Erase Racism? What are you guys doing?
Erase Racism is a civil rights organization that's housed on Long Island. It's also a regional organization that focuses on educational equity, advocating for educational equity, fair, inclusive, and affordable housing. We also provide I don't like to call it DEI anymore. I say equity and inclusion training, as well as organizational consulting to help organizations move toward racial equity. I am introducing, we're introducing kind of a four-prong approach to our work. But before I even tell you that, I want to also talk about the fact that I was appointed the president of Erase Racism in September. Its founder and President Emerita Elaine Gross started this organization over 20 years ago. And I would be remiss if I did not really honor Elaine for having the courage to, one, name an organization Erase Racism at the time that she did, but also consistently fight to erase racism on Long Island. And because of her kind of elbowing her way in and really doing a lot of the hard work, the initial work, I am able to step in a way that is powerful. There's still a lot of work to do, but I have to really honor Elaine for having the foresight and the commitment to start Erase.
She opened up a lot of doors, and she made people, especially in the corporate community, start to think a little bit about how we treat other people. And when she left, I know that there was some great concern as to what happens to the organization now, but then we find you.
Yes, and I'm so thankful. I'm so excited. So Erase, we're looking at a four-prong approach. We will continue our policy and advocacy in the housing and educational equity space. What many people don't know is that Erase actually has a very strong youth component. The Roush Foundation funded our students to go to the Reimagining Schools Conference with Teachers College in Columbia. As a result, we had a student task force and a student voices campaign where we have summer internships, and they stay with us throughout the course of the year and they work on different issues. And so I really want to amplify and strengthen that work as a way for us to build leaders, future leaders for Long Island, right? Even if they go away, they're going to take that with them to college and school, but they certainly, hopefully, will come back home. We are expanding our equity and inclusive training and racial equity training. And the other thing I think that we started to do well and I want to strengthen is our community engagement and empowerment. You know, they say that if you give a person a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, they eat for the rest of their life. And so part of our work is to make sure that we empower parents so that they can advocate for their children, as well as communities around housing, so that they can have a say in how they bring affordable housing to their communities and how they move to ensure that we get rid of some of the structural racism that is built into the educational and housing system.
In doing some of the trainings, give us a sense of who you're doing the training for. And what their needs are. And, you know, when you do a training program, regardless of the time, maybe it's multiple days, what do you want to come away from so that you can come from the training and say, I did my job. I feel good about this.
Well, I like when people do trainings and they walk away uncomfortable and questioning, because that means I've done a really good job. If I walk away and someone's like, yeah, that was good, and they're not feeling something, then I haven't really done my job, right?
Follow you, sure.
The trainings, we train anyone, really. Most recently, I did a training with Westbury Arts, because they, as an organization, made a commitment to moving towards racial equity.
Right.
I'll be doing a training with Freeport School tomorrow.
Very good.
So we work with a lot of schools, corporations, different organizations. We do some of the similar training that everyone does, understanding racism, because what you would find is many people don't even have a working definition of what racism is, right? I try to build in there understanding whiteness as well, because that's people get nervous when they hear that, and we have to talk about it. And then if it's Long Island specific, I then connect the understanding racism with what it looks like on Long Island. And I think that it's important to note that Erase Racism was one of the first people talking about structural racism, right? I mean, Dr. King talked about it many times, but in terms of really on Long Island and connecting the way that racism was codified in policies and exclusionary zoning. I mean, Long Island was our first suburb. It was also our first example of how racial covenants were built into the laws of our various towns and hamlets, et cetera. So we do that. And then there's another piece of the work we do that really offers support to organizations around how do you move towards racial equity, and a lot of that is around building cultural competencies, right? Because the thing is, most people feel you take a workshop, you change some policies, you change some policies, right? And then we've accomplished being anti-racist, and we are now an equitable organization. It's actually a 10 to 15 year journey before you even see substantive results that are more than just we hired more people of color.
I'm certainly not surprised at a lot of that. For the past few years, maybe 3, 4, Feeding America, which is the national organization that oversees all the food banks, have had a very sharp focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, Long Island Cares last year received a very generous grant to start reaching out to the African American community, to the Hispanic community, primarily Central South American, as well as indigenous people, the tribal nation. And, you know, just working with those 3 groups and talking about food insecurity, we learn so much about the culture. One of the things that we do here at our Center for Community Engagement is what Harry Chapin initially wanted this organization to do, and that was come up with a way to lift people out of poverty, so that, as you said, you know, give a person a fish, they're going to eat for the day. Teach them how to fish for themselves, they'll eat forever. We look at the root causes of hunger, and when you look at why people are food insecure or going hungry, you look at things like poverty, you look at things like homelessness, immigration status, and systemic racism. By keeping people out of the mainstream, as we've done on Long Island for decades. Look at our school districts, look at our housing. You know, I immigrated. I tell people I'm an immigrant to Long Island. I immigrated from Brooklyn, 40 years ago. And one of the first things that struck me was the housing divide, the community divide, that you can travel down Washington Avenue on the Hempstead Garden City line, and you feel as if you're in 2 different states once you cross over. That has to have a tremendous impact on people.
Yeah, and it's not just a visual impact. The divide, it's also a policy and legal impact in terms of spending, resource allocation to schools, in terms of home ownership versus. I'll give you one better. Let's talk about Hempstead.
Okay.
Because the folks in Hempstead are relatively property poor, they voted to tax themselves more so that they could ensure that their schools had more money. And yet their schools are still under-resourced. Right? So it's that kind of dichotomy that shows you how so much of the inequity is built into our laws and the way we function. And so I think I just want to also congratulate you on recognizing the indigenous peoples, because they are so often left out of the conversation when they have experienced, I mean, they live on reservations still. Right? And yes, that is their land, but the idea that they lived in
it might as well be a gated community somewhere.
It's not right, or you could look at it as an interment, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea that they have been relegated to a status that has rendered them invisible in their own land.
Yeah, you're true. It's true.
is an example of how white supremacy and racism shows up. So I think, but going back to your point about when you think about hunger, yes. And I think we also have to look at how that plays out in terms of how racism then gets perpetuated, right? For example, we all know that the largest affirmative action act that America ever did was the GI Bill.
Right.
No one wants to admit it, right?
Yeah,
but it was the GI Bill, and specifically for white GIs. Because black GIs applied, and then many of them were not able to access.
We never recognized the contribution that black soldiers made to this nation.
So when you're doing a training on Long Island, all of those people whose grandparents and great-grandparents were able to purchase houses and get college diplomas and
under the GI Bill,
under the
people
GI
were going to college,
Bill,
bought a house.
They will say to me, well, my grandfather fought for this country and worked hard for what he had. He absolutely did, and he got a leg up too. Right?
He bought a house in Levittown for $8,000.
Bought a house in Levittown where black people couldn't purchase in Levittown.
Yep.
So the idea, so we build in this idea around meritocracy and hard work without recognizing that literally white people in this country have been the benefit. We talk about white women, but really affirmative action has existed in this country from its existence. You know why?
Go ahead.
You had to be white landed male gentry.
Interesting.
So if you were not that, you already, if you were that, you already started off with all of the power, all of the money, all of the access.
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Laura, we could go on for a third, a fourth, and a fifth episode. But I we're running out of time. But I do want to give you an opportunity for the people that download the show and watch it. How do we support the work that your organization is doing and helping you move forward? How do we go about that?
So the first thing, thank you for asking it.
Sure.
The first thing I would say is to please go to our website, www.eraseracismny.org. Look and find out a little bit about what we're doing.
Right.
There's an opportunity to join some of our working groups. There's also an opportunity to donate because we are in need of financial support. The other thing I would ask you to do is possibly try to schedule us for trainings so that we can work with you or your organization or your school district, your church, anything that you would like us to do, your sorority, fraternity, to move the work forward of erasing racism and moving towards equity. And I will also ask that if none of that moves you, that the next time you have a negative thought about someone who doesn't look like you, sound like you, does not sexually identify as you, and has a gender identity that leaves you with question marks, that you take a breath and you ask yourself, why am I so upset? And interrupt your bias and try something new, like just taking the person for who they are and not all of the labels we put on them.
That's an outstanding recommendation, and I know for a fact that we're going to be reaching out to you very soon to come and do some training for our staff as well, also our board, and maybe even the organizations, all 300 of them that we support. We are very, very lucky here on Long Island to have Laura Harding in our nonprofit human service industry. It's not an easy task, and it hasn't been solved for the last 20 years, and it'll probably take another 20 years from now to get something done that we can all be proud of. We've come a long way in many ways in the civil rights movement, but so much more work to be done, as Laura mentioned, in education, in housing, in employment, and just in terms of the way we relate to other people that may look different or think different than we do. I want to thank you for taking the time to watching our program today, and we've had 2 great episodes with Laura. I want to once again thank CardWorks for their generous support of Breaking Bread. And until the next time we have an opportunity to break bread together, this is Paule Pachter, President and CEO of Long Island Cares. Stay well.